going to start us off with a little introduction to yourself for the books.
Thank you so much, Caroline. So I'm Heather Burnside, and I'm an author of gritty crime novels. They're all set in Manchester, and to date I've had 2 trilogies published, which revolve very much around the Manchester gangland scene. The first book, Slur, doesn't so much, but then once it sort of gets going into that trilogy, the second 2 books do, and the 3 books in the other trilogy. First trilogy with Slur is the Riverhill trilogy, and the second trilogy is the Manchester trilogy. I've also published 4 books of a 5-book series, and that's based on the red light district in Manchester. The 5th book goes out in January, called Sapphire, and book 4, which I did intend to bring with me and I've forgotten, it's in the other room, that's called Amber, and that was published by ebook in April and by in paperback just last month. And as the title suggests, it's called the Working Girls series, and it's very much about the lives of the working girls that work the red light districts in Manchester.
So before we went live, we were discussing the problems that you are having with Be Live, which is that you can only see yourself and not me. So hopefully everybody can see both of us. But if they can't, you're the most important. So this is good. And we're also discussing just how good I thought. It's Bad Blood, the one I read, isn't it?
Born Bad, yeah.
Born Bad, that's the one. Why I keep wanting to call it Bad Blood, sorry.
I think Bad Blood was actually the original title that my publishers thought of, and then they changed it to Born Bad. But there is a Bad Blood out there by somebody else, can't quite remember who it was, but yeah.
Right, Born Bad is so good. Genuinely really good. I'm not a reader of very gritty crime books normally. I'm normally a fan of quite cozy crime. So yours got a 5-star review from me, which I don't give away very often.
Yeah, I was really thrilled with that. Thank you so much.
Well, I absolutely loved it. I finished it and downloaded book 2.
Brilliant.
In the same series to read. I haven't got to there yet because I'm still sort of catching up with some author chat reading, but it's on my Kindle waiting.
Brilliant.
Because I need to know what's going to happen. So one of my questions was for you was like, do the characters, and we'll try and do this without giving away spoilers because it is quite hard.
Yeah.
Do Peter and Adele kind of resolve their relationship?
Oh, that is a tricky one without giving away spoilers. They have a complex relationship, shall we say, which is very much shaped by their environment, the way they grew up, and it affects them both into adulthood. And I really can't say anything more than that without spoiling it.
That's fair enough. I think that's what I found so good about it is I've worked with people from those kind of backgrounds. It felt very sensitively handled, even though it dealt with some quite sort of difficult topics. How hard was it to sort of get that balance of really reflecting that kind of life and things, but keeping it sort of quite sensitively written?
So this one, as with a lot of my books, I did explain to Caroline before that I do bring a lot of personal experiences and my past life into them. I should add actually that doesn't apply in the case of the series about working girls. I have no experience in that field whatsoever. But with Born Bad, the first part of the book, it kind of starts off where they're growing up. I think Adele's about 12 from memory because I've written a few since, but I think Adele's about 12 at the start of the book. And the first part of that book is very much kind of loosely based on my own childhood. So I think that's where the emotional aspect comes into the books. And then later it's for anybody that's read it, I wouldn't want you to read anything into what happens later. That's completely different. And that's just my author imagination running riot, really. But I think also because the first part's based on my childhood, it was my imagination thinking, well, I've had a lucky escape really, and what if things got even worse, you know, what if this was to happen? So yeah, that's probably where the balance comes into it. Because like I say, there's an emotional aspect. There's quite a bit of emotional depth because all them thoughts are there in my head, and I suppose they spill over onto paper or onto the screen.
You can really see that in there. They're very sort of, I think everybody has known one of those like kids like Peter and Adele when they were younger.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes it such an emotional read. That's
yeah, I think it's kind of surprised a lot of my friends really, that even friends that I've got some friends I've known since I was literally 12, and you know, they had no idea of I think nobody knows, do they, what goes on behind closed doors really.
No, but it's really, you can sort of see that sensitive, that understanding in the book, and I think that's what makes it so real. And so I don't really know how to explain it, but it's marvelous book.
Yeah, you mean there are kind of shocking events, and sometimes in the books I like to put characters in difficult situations, and sometimes they'll react in shocking ways that you wouldn't quite expect. But given what they've been through, you can kind of empathise, even though they're bad, even though they're doing bad things, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? And they're so well fleshed out characters as well. I think it's really, you sort of so entwined in them and their lives, and they're so realistic and believable that you really get drawn into the book. That's why I instantly downloaded book. I was like, I cannot not know what's going to happen next.
Oh, that's lovely to hear.
Gonna have to, like, I think I finished it and was on Amazon about 5 minutes later.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Sam wants to know if it takes a toll on you writing with such emotion, especially the what if moments.
I think when I'm writing the personal stuff, sometimes it can get to me, because I do write a lot of controversial topics, really. Like Amber, for instance, it's essentially a crime book. It's a working girl and her life. Obviously, it's got all those elements of suspense and tension, and you know, because of the life she lives, and there are murders taking place. But in parallel is her childhood, and her childhood is one basically where she's been groomed and pushed into this life of prostitution from a very young age. And that was a very, very difficult book to write. In the same respect, so was Born Bad, because like I say, the first part of that, I've drawn very much from my childhood. So, but on the other hand, it probably sounds awful because I'm by no means disturbed or anything. I'm quite together considering what I've been through, but it's like a therapy. It's good to get it all out there, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's a way of working through some of those things.
Yeah.
So all of them are set in Manchester, and I feel like Manchester and the estates of Manchester that you write about are also kind of integral to the books.
Yeah. So the two trilogies. So you've read Born Bad. Yeah, that's based in. I'm trying to think now because I've actually written 12 books today, but the other two are to follow. So it's remembering previous books. I've got a dreadful memory anyway. So yeah, the two trilogies. The first one, they're called the Riverhill trilogy. A little bit goes into the first book, but it really takes off from the second book, and it's based in an area where I actually lived as a teenager. And I left there in, I think it was 1980. And then in the 90s, what happened was there was this real gangland problem in Manchester with the drugs and the shootings and everything. And my dad was actually still living on that estate. And there were two primary areas where the gangs were based, which was in Moss Side and Cheetham Hill. And what happened in Moss Side was there were these groups of lads that had actually grown up together, opposite sides of the road. But as they become adults, they kind of pick the sides, and they were constantly at war with each other. There was a pub there that they used to hang out as well, and a whole estate around there. And the problem became so bad that the authorities raised the estate to the ground, got rid of the pub. And basically all that happened after that was they just moved on into other areas. And one of the areas that they moved to was basically where I used to live. So my dad was living on this little walk with a big avenue surrounding it. And on the avenue, two gangster families actually moved in. And my dad used to be saying, there's been another shooting, you know, and because he was sort of in his 70s by then, and you kind of think, oh, he's exaggerating a bit, he's getting a bit carried away. And then it started appearing in the papers. So basically the main road next to that estate, they were literally standing at the bus stop selling drugs, and it was just constantly in the press. So I kind of got interested in that and thought, yeah, I'd like to find out a bit more. So I had a look at a lot of news articles. It made the national press quite a lot as well. It was a massive problem in Manchester in the 90s. I mean, we still have the problems, but the 90s was particularly bad. And I also read up non-fiction books of sort of ex-gangsters, or one in particular was a journalist who'd researched the whole gangland scene throughout Manchester. So that was the first trilogy. And then the second trilogy, because I found a publisher by then who wanted more of the same, I then went into, there was another group of gangs based mainly in Salford, and they used to take over all the doors of the nightclubs in Manchester. Again, it was all in the press, but I did a bit of research and found out more. So that second trilogy is based on that sort of nightclub scene and the gangs that used to take over. They used to call it the door wars, because they used to like to control the doors of nightclubs. And by doing that, they could also control the drugs that were coming into the club and put a tax on whatever drugs were being sold within the club. So yeah, the background very much comes into it.
So would you move your writing outside of Manchester at all?
I've no plans to at the moment. The 5-book series is also all in Manchester, and then I've actually finished writing that, but I'm just going through the edits with the publishers. So the next book, moving on from that, is a spin-off from that series. So again, it's set in Manchester, and I've signed up to do that spin-off and 3 standalones, which are all based in Manchester again. So I'd like to try something different in the future. I'm thinking maybe psychological thrillers, but I don't know whether they'd necessarily move out of Manchester. They might move in terms of the area. So instead of being council estate Manchester, it might be more, you know, the leafy suburbs of Cheshire or something, but it's still kind of greater Manchester area.
Yeah. Why do you think, so there's a lot of crime writers in Manchester, like a lot of you.
Yeah.
There's quite a lot of you in our group that all live in Manchester.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of how many I can name off the top of my head, but there is an awful lot of crime writers in Manchester. Why do you think there are so many?
I think because we have a lot of crime. It's a big city, and it has all the problems that a big city has. Whether there's proportionally more crime writers in Manchester than elsewhere, I couldn't say.
Do you know, I feel like there is. I live in Leeds,
Yeah.
a big city, and I can't think of that many crime writers that live in Leeds. I can think of like 2 or 3, but I could name a lot more than 2 or 3 that live in Manchester or the greater Manchester area.
Yeah, I think Manchester has that sort of literary, creative kind of vibe anyway, doesn't it? You know, with the music and the art, and so maybe it's all part and parcel of that. I don't know.
Interesting. So, one of Sam's new favourite questions I'm going to ask you, she won't mind me borrowing it, is what's the most recent scene that you wrote? Without giving away
Most recent scene? So this is the second book of the 4 that I've signed up for in this recent contract. So this is the first standalone novel, really. And it's a guy who kind of drifted into the gangster life because of his upbringing. He's now a man of 40 and is running pubs and clubs in Manchester, and a couple of upstarts have come into his pub. He's a bit disenfranchised, really, with the whole scene and what he's done and what he's achieved. It's all got feels a bit shallow to him, but it's all he's ever known. But there are times when people try it on and he has to step up and be, the man he's always been. And these 2 upstarts come into his pub trying to demand, trying to get him to hand over the takings of the till, basically. So it all gets a bit violent after that. And I think the 2 upstarts end up wishing they'd never walked into that bar in the first place. So yeah, that's a kind of typical Heather Burnside scene.
So we've touched on it a bit, but what kind of research do you do for your books? Because there's not a lot of like police procedure, things like that in.
Yeah, so for me, the police procedure was the one I always struggled with, because that does come into some books a little bit, but I do have contacts now. So I'll take the series as an example. So like I say, that's set in the red light district. And what happened with the first book, it's quite a long story, this, so I hope you don't mind.
No, go for it.
So what happened, the first book, The Mark, the idea actually came from back in the 90s. That was when I was doing my writing course, and I was just jotting down notes of anything that occurred to me that was a bit interesting, and thinking, yeah, I might do something with that in the future. And I was watching an episode of the original Prime Suspect, and Jane Tennyson, was sat in this pub. My memory is quite hazy because it was a long time ago, but from what I remember, she was sat in this pub and she was interviewing these sex workers, as we now have to call them. And she wasn't interviewing them so much as questioning them, trying to get information about crimes that had taken place. And it was a very dodgy pub with some really dubious characters hanging about. She was dressed very smartly, as she did, in a nice suit. She spoke very refined. And my first thought was that she was so out of place in this setting. And my second thought was, she's leaving herself open to all sorts of problems. So that then gave me the idea to make her a journalist, interviewing these girls for an expose about the lives of a street sex worker. She then gets spotted at the bar by this really dodgy character who decides to follow her home because she stands out so much. He develops an interest in her, which gradually becomes an obsession. So in this book, I brought in very much the lives of the sex workers. And like I said before, I've not got a lot of knowledge in that field. So I read books by girls who had worked the streets. I read articles, and I also watched videos on YouTube. There was a series by the BBC. And to be honest, that was more eye-opening than anything else. And it was basically this series that had been on the BBC, where they interviewed these girls that worked the red light district in Leeds. And they were very, very candid about their lives. And so that, I kind of noticed that they had a lot of similarities. They'd all had dysfunctional childhoods. They'd grown up in care. They had parents who were alcoholics, drug dealers. Maybe their own mother was working the beat. So they had a lot of similarities there, but I also noticed that each girl had their own distinct personality. And doing that research gave me the idea for a whole series. So after The Mark, I've then based each book on one particular girl and her story. So it's, like I said for Amber, it's a crime novel in that you've got all them elements of the danger, the suspense, the tension, the crimes that are taking place, in in that one street girls are being killed and that sort of thing. But most of them also go into, there's about 2 or 3 of them where I've written the childhood in parallel and what has led them to that point to be living that sort of life. But yeah, sorry, I've gone off at a tangent a bit. So yeah, in terms of the research, that was the main thrust of the research for the Working Girls series. But then as I've written each individual book, obviously one of them, the girl's grown up in care. So through a contact of mine, I've found a couple of, in fact, on this site, I found a social worker. I can't remember her name now. Is it Mary Bell? Something like that. She was very helpful. And also a contact of mine that used to work in a school, used to be a truancy officer, a couple of her contacts as well that had worked with children in care. So there was that one. And then for the last 2 books in the series, I went into Manchester and I visited LifeShare because there's one of my girls ends up homeless in one of the books. And in fact, in 2 of the books, but it's the main thrust of one of the books when she ends up homeless. So I went to visit LifeShare, which is a charity for the young and homeless. And they were very, very helpful. And the lady there explained that there are a lot of overlaps between homeless young girls and sex work, because when they become desperate for a bed for the night or something to eat, what they actually do is they start giving sexual favours to get something in return, and it kind of spirals from there. I also visited MASH, which is Manchester Action on Street Health, and they help working girls. So they have a van that tours the red light areas in Manchester, and they give out condoms and they offer them a cup of tea, and they can report any dodgy clients, and they just generally look after the welfare of the girls. They also have a base where the girls can go in the daytime to meet and chat and get advice and information. So yeah, that was very much the research for the last 2 books in the series. And I've also put author notes in those 2 books of organisations. Those 2 are in the last book, and in the second to last one, Amber, I've put details of an organisation that's for adult victims of childhood sexual abuse, because I thought that in a way I felt a bit guilty that I was kind of making entertainment out of the really traumatic experiences that people have been through. So I felt as though I needed to do something positive out of the books. So I've kind of given links to these organisations to help people that might have been through certain situations, or that might want to donate to these charities to help out.
Which is a good thing. Sam has commented on there, which is true, that I'm going to visit her soon. I'm actually going to be in Manchester very soon, about a week or so. Looking forward to it. She said maybe she should take me on a crime fiction walk, show me the sights.
Take to the estate where I used to live. You best have your bulletproof vest on, though.
I mean, I feel like I live in Leeds. It's not like the most.
Yeah, it depends what area, doesn't it, really? I mean, I live very much in a working class area now, but it's nothing like that estate that I spent my teens on.
Yeah, I do. I live in a sort of an area of Leeds that's, like you said, it's quite working class. It's quite, you get quite a mixture of people, but it's not, there are worse estates.
Yeah.
There are always like the ones that that have the sort of things on, aren't there? Like,
yeah,
every city has them.
The ones that make the press.
But they're in every city. It's not unique to because Leslie said, are you saying Manchester is rough?
No, it's just particular areas. It's no, I mean, sometimes I think one of the difficulties is with my books, because I do base a lot of them on areas where I've lived, and obviously because the crime as well. sometimes I do worry that I'm reflecting Manchester in too much of a negative light, but I think because they're crime novels, you know, they have to have that element, really.
Yeah, and we all know that. I mean, it's like we were saying, there's any city, there's going to be sort of estates that are not good. There's going to be places that you don't want to go.
Yeah.
It doesn't make the whole city bad. I like Manchester. I'm quite lucky.
I love Manchester. I've lived here all my life. But I think the thing that a lot of these gritty crime novels do is they take you to a life that it might only be 2 miles down the road, but you'd never venture there. But you can do it from the safety of, you know, reading it through your Kindle or your paperback. And I think that's what a lot of gritty crime novels do.
It's quite nice sometimes as well to read. I like a lot of like Northern UK crime stuff. It's quite nice to read things based on places that you know.
Yeah.
As weird as that sounds.
No, a lot of people say that they like to recognise, because a lot of mine are going to the city centre as well. And a lot of people do like to recognise the names of streets and things like that. Because I used to give mine fictitious names at first. And then the publisher said, no, the readers really like to, you know, recognise the names of places. So I had to change that a bit.
Well, some authors do like photo books, don't they? I mean, I don't think you would do the same for Manchester or a big city, but I'm thinking of like Peter May's Hebrides. He did a whole like photo book of all the locations that he used. And
oh, right.
You know, a lot of authors, like Liz Mystery's a really good one. She writes crime books set in Bradford.
Liz Mystery's, her, I know, I think it's a nephew actually, lives, well, he used to have a shop in the town where I live. Whether he still does, I don't know.
But she, in the run up to any of her books that she releases that are set in Bradford, she posts pictures of the bits of Bradford she's used as a location.
Ah, right.
Which I always think is really nice. I like that because I like that I could go to Bradford, which isn't that far from where I live, having read the book and go and look at the locations.
Yeah, I tend to avoid a lot of the areas that I write about these days, to be honest.
I can imagine.
Not all of them, because in a couple of my later books, one that I've just written that's not out yet, one of my sex workers has gone. She's moved on in life, so she lives in sort of a nicer area on the outskirts of Manchester now.
So Laura Hamilton says, do your books have to be read in a specific order, or can they be read in any as standalones?
Right, so the first trilogy, the River Hill trilogy, when I first wrote the first one, it wasn't intended to be a trilogy. So I think you could kind of start with book 2 with that one if you wanted. I think book 3 follows on very much from book 2. With the second trilogy, the Manchester trilogy, that is definitely, you do have to read that one in order. It's like a continuous story, really. With the Working Girls series, you could get away with reading each book in isolation, although I would recommend reading the first one, The Mark, first, because that kind of sets the scene and introduces a lot of the girls. But each book after that is based on an individual girl, although I do bring some of the other girls into them now and again, but you could kind of get away with reading each one in isolation with them.
I heartily recommend the Manchester trilogy, Laura. That's where I started. Go with that one. It's great. Sam has asked if you've ever had a scene where you've named a place where somebody lives and they've contacted you about it.
No, I've actually, I've had a couple of people on Facebook say, oh, you know, I'm familiar with the area, I used to live there or whatever. But I've actually, the area where I spent my teens, I've actually taken it off Amazon now, because I did have this irrational fear that somebody from the gangland scene might try to track me down or something. Although none of the characters are based on an actual person, I have to add that.
Fair enough. Do you have a lot of say in the covers and titles and things?
So I don't have any say in the covers. I think because I'm kind of grouped under the gangland genre, even though I think my books are gritty crime rather than gangland, although some of them do enter into gangland territory. I think the publishers do look for a particular look that fits in with that genre, so I don't have any say on that. I tell a lie, no, the latest book that's going out in January, they did come back to me with that one, but it's the first one that they did. And they were still going for that look, but they gave me a few alternative girls. And then I think the colouring, it was always going to be a blue because the name of the book's Sapphire and obviously Sapphire Blue. So for instance, amber, the title's like an amber colour. So they did give me a couple of alternatives with different shades of the deep blue. So I did have a bit to say in that one. In terms of the titles, I didn't choose, well, I chose the Riverhill Trilogy because those I originally published independently. I didn't choose any of the Manchester Trilogy. I didn't choose the Mark, but with the 4 subsequent books in the Working Girls series, I'd already thought of the idea to have dual names for each of the girls, because my idea was that the pimp liked his girls to be exotic, so he felt that if he gave them all a dual name, it would be more appealing to the clients. So he was a bit misguided, but yeah. So and the publishers liked that idea, so they went with that.
Oh, I've got another question here. It says, how do you keep track of the characters and settings ready for the following book?
So this is the difficulty with the series, but I basically do what I was taught to do on the creative writing course over 20 years ago, which is I have a text document, which is basically the story and any notes that I fling in there. But I also have a character list. So I'll have a table with the name, age, physical characteristics, personality traits, that sort of thing. I also keep what I call my schedule of events or sequence of events. So for each scene, I'll just do 2 or 3 lines. So I'll have the chapter and each individual scene, just so I can quickly recap on what's happened. And then with the Working Girls series, I also did a timeline for the whole series, because timelines are my nightmare, to be honest. I'm not very good with timelines. So with that, I did a timeline for the whole series because some of the girls' stories overlap. So for instance, with Sapphire, because it was the last book, the 5th book, I had to look at the timeline and say, right, where was she in that year in that book? What was she doing in that one? What was she doing in, so that I could fit that all in with her story. So it did get more and more difficult with each book, but fortunately, because I'd done an individual sequence of events for each book, it enabled me to, pull out a timeline that I could then use for the whole series. So yeah, that's the way I keep track. Oh, I also do a place names as well, place names and description. So because I do have this dread of putting something in a book that will vastly contradict something that's gone in an earlier book. So yeah, I keep track of everything. Plus the fact that I've got a terrible memory as well, so I need to keep track of everything.
I always like that question because you always get really interesting answers. I think it's Victoria Dowd has like a little Lego village of like one of her books. It's all like been built by her son, and she moves the characters around to know if they're in.
That sounds good. That sounds really good.
It's a quite clever way of doing it, isn't it?
Yeah, I think every author has their own method, don't they?
They do, and it's always interesting to hear about how they do it. It's like, I think that's the most fascinating thing when you start hearing how authors create their books.
Yeah.
So we've got, what did you learn from the writing course that helped you to get started?
Oh God, everything. I can't praise it enough. So if you don't mind me giving the name, it's the Writers' Bureau in Manchester. Absolutely fantastic. When I did it, they just had the one course, which was really comprehensive. So aside from writing novels, it was short stories, theatre, TV, the whole shebang. But out of the whole lot, I just found straight away novels was my forte. And I learned all the basics, like viewpoint and I'm trying to think now. I do it so automatically now. I'll have to have a good think. So the fact that you can't head hop, you've got to have it from a particular viewpoint in each scene. Show, don't tell, active and passive. These might not mean a lot to a lot of people. Building up suspense, all sorts of things. I've read books subsequent to that as well, writing tips. I've got a very good one about writing suspense, which is great. All about hooks at the start of your chapters and cliffhangers at the end of your chapters. And there's so many. I mean, a lot of people say you can't learn writing, but I think there are so many techniques that are valuable that really help when you're writing books.
I think Sam signed up with the Writers Bureau.
Yeah, it's excellent. And when I did it, it took me over 3 years to complete it. I did it when the kids were little, and I used to study in the evenings when the kids were in bed. So it did take me a long, long time, because what they used to do, they used to encourage you to get articles published in magazines. So if you kind of had a run with a magazine, you were busy trying to do your next module, but also following up, striking while the iron was hot. But now I believe they've broken the modules down so that you can do smaller courses. And I think that's better, because particularly for me, I'd have probably just gone in for the novel writing and maybe not bothered with a lot of the others.
What Leslie wants to know what the book of writing suspense was called, I think.
Do you want to bear with me while I just grab it?
Yeah, go with it.
Okay.
While we wait for her to grab it, I'm going to give a plug for the book auctions that are starting tomorrow. There's some really good signed books coming up for grabs for the charity Red Kite Academy in Corby, which is such a good cause. It's a special school and it does amazing work. Keep your eye out. They'll be pinned from 3 till 9 every day in the announcements. Oh dear, Sam.
Sorry about that. I'm back.
It's all right.
That one, that's my favourite writing book. Can you read it?
Up a bit further.
Creating Suspense in Fiction by John Paxton Sheriff.
Perfect.
And I've read that about 2 or 3 times. Because every now and again I like to recap and just think, is there anything I could be doing to make my books even better? Because I think when you've written so many, sometimes you do think, oh, am I getting a bit stale? Is there, I want to inject a bit more excitement into it. And if anybody is interested, there's a couple of anybody who wants to start writing or is at the beginning of the writing career, there's another couple good novels. One is that one, not novels, sorry, writing books. Can you see it?
Yeah.
That's Writing a Novel by Nigel Watts. And also Sophie King has done a good book. How to Write Your First Novel. And actually a lot of the Sophie King book, a lot of those basics are what I learned on my writing course. But it was good to recap by reading that.
Sam said, if it makes you feel better, about 3 years to finish. She said she signed up in 2003. And has handed in 1 assignment so far.
Maybe then a much quicker route would be to read this Sophie King book, because it is really good and it does have a lot of what's in the writing course.
And she does need to get a move on and write a novel.
Yeah, that would be a lot quicker for her. It covers all the basics, and you're at an advantage where you don't have to keep sending assignments in and waiting for them to be marked and doing all the other things as well. You can just read it or skip to whatever section you want.
Yeah, because she's written some good short stories for us.
Oh,
I
right.
did, while you were searching for your book, I gave a quick plug for our charity auction that we're doing.
Oh, right.
Don't know if you've seen it, but it's like the signed books start tomorrow. We've got signed books donated from lots of authors, and you can bid to win them. There's some great ones coming up.
Oh, I didn't see that actually. Is it too late to add one or?
I don't know. You have to message my dad. He's David Gilchrist. He founded the group, and he's been organising it all. I haven't really had a lot to do with it, but we started with characters and some of our UK Crime Book Club mugs, and it's all going to Red Kite Special School.
Oh, right. That's great.
Which is really nice. So it's a good cause. When it all goes, we're hoping to send them a lot of money. We made an anthology with short stories in as well.
Oh, that's great.
As Laura said, Sam's summer short definitely whetted the appetite for more. So Sam, listen, buy Sophie King's book and get on with writing a book.
Yeah, definitely.
Someone's asked, when you start writing a series, do you have any idea how many books there'll be, or do you just keep rolling with it if it's successful?
So the last, I'd have to take that series by series. So the first trilogy, it was only going to be one book. And then as I come towards the end of that book, my main character was Julie, and the second main character was Rita, who really was a bit of a character. And I'd kind of hinted that Rita, her father was a petty crook, and a daughter hung about with a few dubious characters. And Rita was such an interesting person because she was one of these sort of almost like a Coronation Street character, like a Bette Lynch type, only younger, always making people laugh, a little bit crude and, that sort of thing. And I just thought she's a far more interesting character. What you would call a tart with a heart, I suppose. She's a far more interesting character than Julie. So I then thought of the idea to use her in another 2 novels. So that became a trilogy. The second trilogy was always going to be a trilogy. And after that, my publishers wanted more series, and I'd had enough of series just because of the things I've discussed, like keeping track from book to book. They are a lot more demanding than writing a standalone. So I thought of the idea for the Mark and a couple of other tentative ideas I was playing with, and the publishers were happy with them. And then when I did the research for the Mark, that gave me the idea for another. Initially, it was another 3 books. And I just thought, I've got to go with it because, when you get an idea and it's just something that you just know you've got to write. So I thought, okay, I didn't want to do another series, but this has got to be written. So, but I didn't sign up for the whole 4. I signed up for 3 just because I wanted to see how things went. And then in the meantime, I thought the idea for a 5th book. So I then did an additional contract for the last 2 books. So it's not always planned from the start. Sometimes it kind of develops. I know a lot of authors do plan it from the start, but with me, it kind of develops.
I think, again, it's like the writing process, isn't it? Everyone's got their own ways of doing it. Keep writing, please. You've converted me. I never read gritty books.
There are a lot of good gritty authors out there, actually. It's just so popular now. I think it's more popular than ever, and there just seems to be more and more authors springing up all the time.
There is, but I think people find the niche, and I think what's good about crime fiction is you find your niche that works for you, like the kinds that generally appeals, don't you? So, like you write gritty crime fiction, and lots of people love that. I've never until fairly recently found gritty crime fictions that I've really enjoyed.
Yeah.
So I'm not generally when I sort of do reviews, I will say that. So I read a lot for the author chats of things I wouldn't normally pick up. And it's teaching me that sometimes I need to try things.
Yeah.
I wouldn't normally buy because I discovered the Manchester Trilogy and they're brilliant.
Oh, thank you.
Do you know, like, it is worth it sometimes. Sometimes you just got to try stuff, even if you think it's not your cup of tea, because you find things that are new and different. And you're definitely going to be on my author list of people I'll be reading lots of.
Oh, thank you so much. That's so nice to hear.
Sam said, I'm not one for saying that either, honestly. I'm not. I don't make these things up just on the video stream. If I didn't like that, I just wouldn't have said anything.
Oh.
It is genuinely well meant. Like, I did really enjoy it.
Thank you.
Sam says, how do you know when you've got enough material for a book? How do you know what's the difference between like a short story and a book?
Wow, that's a tricky one. Gosh, I think I'd have to illustrate that probably through a particular book. Gosh, it's for me, it's something that's quite instinctive, because I have written short stories, but it wasn't my forte, short stories. I think I need to have the character development, and I found that although a lot of people can do it and do it quite skillfully, I felt as though I was restricted and I couldn't develop my characters enough with short stories. Do you know, I couldn't even tell you. It's so instinctive. It's hard to describe, really. So, well, I'll give Born Bad as an example, but I don't want to give too much of the book away. So it's a brother-sister relationship. So I had this idea of this difficult life that the girl leads, and what if something devastating would happen off the back of that. And I had she very much wants to create a better life for herself. And then I thought to myself, well, we also need to look at the brother, because he's taken a different path. So I've kind of interspersed the sections with her with sections that deal with the brother as well. Well, scenes, I should say. I've kind of, to an extent, I've alternated the scenes. So it's kind of, there wouldn't have been enough for a novel with her story on her own without telling a bit about the brother and his life, and the mother and her life, and the grandmother and her life. So I think maybe that's easy to do with sagas and this gritty sort of crime, because they're very family based. So you've always got the little offshoots of the different people involved and what's happening with them. And sometimes you can create almost a subplot that runs alongside the main plot.
So
I'm sorry if that's not very helpful, but it's probably down to the fact that I'm just rubbish at short stories anyway. I could never get the length right in a short story. And yet with the novels, I have to have a specific word count, and they nearly always, sometimes they nearly always fall within that word count. Sometimes I'll feel like they're going a little bit short, but then I'll think of another element that I can add. The last one I did was actually the longest to date. I think the shortest, because I didn't have to work to a specific word count when I was independent. So my shortest is about 70,000. But since I've been with the publishers, I have to write somewhere between 80 and 90. And mostly I come in between 85 and 88,000. But the last one I wrote was 94,000. And I just felt like this girl's story, there was so much I could say. I could go on forever. So, yeah, maybe it's because with a novel, you've got those sort of interrelated events, whereas a short story is more one event, one happening, no kind of subplots, maybe. Maybe that's the difference.
So Sam says she's interested in how authors approach character development. How do you create such depth so the characters are believable? Because I think that's what really stood out for me about yours.
Yeah, the publishers have said this as well. Yeah, well, my first ever editor said, I can actually tell that you've come from that background because you know these characters so well. And the characters that I've come across, I've grown up with, And I'll see little things that, in fact, that's one of the things that course covers is kind of people watching. And I do a lot of that, you know, and you see these characteristics or phrases that they come out with, and yeah, I think it is just because I know them, you know, because I mean, they do say write about what you know, and I think it's because the characters that I'm so familiar with. I mean, the estate where I lived during my teens, unbelievable, some of the people on there. You know, there was a woman that used to F and blind at every other word, you know, and she just had this certain way of speaking that was so her. And then I'm trying to think of some of the characters that I have drawn on people that I've met. And sometimes it won't be one particular person, it'll be like little characteristics that I've picked from different people and I've moulded it all into one character. But not just the estate where I grew up, I've noticed it because I used to work in offices in the past. And you seem to get these set stereotypes in every office that you work. So you'll have like your working class snob. We used to have a couple of offices I worked in, it like your sort of hippie chick who's your aging hippie chick, if you like, that had grown up in the 60s and 70s, but was now a woman in her whatever 50s. So there was often that type. There'd be the sycophant that couldn't do enough for the boss. We've probably all come across them. So yeah, people watching, the more you watch people, the more you will bring that into your characters. It was one of the best tips from the course, actually.
That's good advice. So one of our favourite group questions is, what is your most memorable moments as an author?
Oh, right. Well, so 5 years ago, I was going through quite a stressful divorce, and I'd done the writing course, and off the back of that, I was publishing articles for magazines and that sort of thing. But it was only ever a part-time thing. Certainly didn't earn enough to live on, and I decided, you know, that was the end of the marriage, and I'd manage whatever way I could. I might have to go back to doing a bit of bookkeeping, maybe get a part-time job bookkeeping and be able to still do my writing in the meantime. The novel was very much on the back burner, so that was something I used to do when I didn't have any copywriting or proofreading or magazine writing work. And then we were doing all the financial negotiations for the divorce settlement, and we were about 5 months down the line, and out of the blue I was approached by Caroline Ridding of, well, she was with Aria at the time, she's now with Boldwood, saying, I've read your first 3 books, we like what we've read, you know, what else can you do? Have you got any other ideas? And that was just like, oh, there is a God. I know I'll manage now. And yeah, so that was a real highlight. And then obviously getting that first book published with a publisher and all the backing that you get from them in terms of marketing and promotion. Because what happened with my first 3 that I published independently, I did a promotion myself. I read up a lot. There's a lot of information in the sort of independent publishing sort of stratosphere. And I'd read up a lot on how to do these promotions. And the first one was quite successful. And I thought, I'll be okay now. I'll just keep publishing books and doing promotions. And the second one I tried, it just didn't have the same effect. Because unless you know what you're doing, it's very hit and miss. But I was just lucky that the first one did well and well enough for the publishers to spot me. And yeah, handed me a lifeline, really. So that was a highlight, definitely.
Are you still with Boldwood?
No, I'm with Aria, but the staff at Boldwood, a lot of them worked at Aria. But I've stuck with Aria. I was I was offered a contract by Boldwood as well this time round, and what they were offering was very good actually, but Aria just took the edge for me, so I stuck with Aria.
Fair enough.
But they're both great publishers.
Yeah, there's a lot of good sort of publishers out there.
Yeah.
One of my favourite questions is, would you make a graphic novel of one of your books?
So do you mean graphic in terms of like a picture book, or in terms of graphic violence?
Like a picture book, like a comic.
Right, I was going to say the other one I've already done. Graphic sex and violence, I've already done that. A picture book. Not a lot of people know this, but I did originally. I published my first novel myself in 2014. Prior to that, I published 2 non-fiction books, which were actually parenting books, and they were very picture-based. The first one was kids' clubs and organisations, and the second one was all about different locations for kids' parties. So there were a lot of pictures of venues and things in there. I think I sold about 150 in total for the 2 of them, and most of them went to libraries. So yeah, they did bomb, but yeah, kind of done that and don't want to go back to it. Thank you very much.
Fair enough. We've got about 4 minutes left.
Okay.
So can we have a recap? Can people buy? This is a question that people often like. Can people buy signed copies of your books from you?
It's not something that I've been asked directly, to be honest. I kind of do it at, if I go out to author chats and that sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, if they wanted it, I'm sure that could be arranged, definitely.
Wonderful. Anne, do you want to finish us off with a recap of you and your books?
Yeah, so, right, gritty crime novels. I've published 10 books to date. I've written a further 2. One which is going through the editorial stages and will be published in January. And the other one is very much a rough first draft. So yeah, published 10, written 12. They're all based in Manchester, and they're all gritty urban crime novels. 2 trilogies and 4 books from a series of 5, with book 5 to go out in January.
Have you got any live events planned?
Yeah, Kaz Finley's actually invited me to Perfect Crime, but it's my very first. In fact, I think this is my first full-length online author chat. I kind of shy away from things like that. I'm a bit, despite my background and my upbringing, I'm actually quite introvert, believe it or not, until you get to know me. And I've kind of avoided things up to now, but I know it's something I've got to do. I've got to start doing, so I've got to step outside of my comfort zone and just do it.
You should do it more often. You're a good interview.
Oh, thank you.
Like, interesting to chat to. Sam said, I'm going to read you this because it might make you more likely to do more of these events in future. She said, thank you so much for a great hour. It's been lovely hearing another Manc accent. And she'll head over if you do a live event at some point and have a book signed.
Oh, brilliant. Well, my publishers want me to do, I did have a launch party for one of my books, and the plan is now, up to now, they've mainly published on Amazon, which, if you're familiar with the market, you'll probably know they're much more expensive if they publish through Amazon. But as it's growing, they're starting to do mass market paperbacks for me. So, like, for example, Amber's much cheaper because that's gone out mass market paperback. So now that things are getting going again post-COVID, well, not post-COVID, but post-lockdown, I suppose, they want me to do more launch parties. So yeah, you'll definitely be invited, Sam. It'd be nice to see you.
Brilliant. And Leslie Lloyd also says you should definitely get yourself out there.
Oh, great. Thank you.
You have a standing invite back to us anytime you want.
Brilliant. I'm just sorry I couldn't make the literature festival at the end of the month, but I literally go into hospital on Friday for major surgery. So yeah, it's just not, I couldn't commit, could I, at the time, because I didn't know when I didn't have my date at the time. So, but okay. Yeah, once I've got this done and I'm back fighting fit, then I'm going for it.
Look after yourself.
Oh, thanks so much.
And thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I've enjoyed it, actually.
That's good.